The air was still on that warm July evening in Star City, West Virginia. 16-year-old Skylar Neese, a high-achieving honors student with a vibrant social life, kissed her parents goodnight as if everything was perfectly normal. She had plans, though ones she hadn't shared. As the apartment settled into silence, Skylar quietly opened her bedroom window, her heart pounding with the thrill of secrecy. This wasn't the first time she had snuck out. It was a small act of rebellion, a way to cling to a sense of freedom. She had no reason to fear what lay ahead. For her, it was just another night of carefree adventure with friends. But this time, the story wouldn't end with a harmless laugh or a sleepy morning return. The night marked the start of an unimaginable betrayal, one that would leave an indelible scar on everyone who knew her. For years, Skylar Neese, Shelia, Eddy, and Rachel Shoaf had been a picture-perfect trio. The girls had grown up together, their lives intertwined by shared memories of sleepovers, inside jokes, and endless hours spent talking about crushes, dreams, and teenage drama. Social media was filled with their smiling faces, evidence of a bond that seemed unbreakable. Skylar was the dependable one, kind and intelligent, with a quick wit that often had her friends in stitches. Shelia, charming and outspoken, was the ringleader, while Rachel brought a quieter, more reserved energy to the group. Together, they balanced one another out. But by the summer of 2012, something had changed. The cracks in their friendship were subtle at first, an unkind comment here, a lingering tension there. Skylar began to notice that Shelia and Rachel were growing closer, often leaving her out. There were whispered conversations, inside jokes she wasn't part of, and an air of secrecy that made her uneasy. Rumors swirled that Skylar had uncovered something about Shelia and Rachel, something they desperately wanted to keep hidden. The once tight-knit trio was unraveling, but no one, least of all Skylar, could have predicted how far her friends would go to ensure their secret remained buried. The clock struck midnight as Skylar slipped through the parking lot of her apartment complex, her footsteps light against the pavement. Surveillance cameras recorded her petite figure moving with purpose, her hoodie pulled up to obscure her face. A car waited for her, its headlights cutting through the quiet darkness. Inside sat Shelia, Eddy, and Rachel Shoaf, her best friends. Skylar climbed into the backseat without hesitation, greeted by familiar faces and laughter. To her, this was just another late-night adventure. Her parents, asleep upstairs, had no reason to suspect she wouldn't be home by morning. Skylar wasn't upset or worried as she left. There was nothing in her demeanor to suggest she had any doubts. The three girls drove off into the night, the soft hum of the car's engine fading into silence. For Skylar, this was a moment of trust, an unspoken bond between friends. But for Shelia and Rachel, it marked the culmination of a dark plan, weeks in the making. On the surface, Skylar, Shelia, and Rachel presented themselves as the epitome of teenage friendship. Their social media accounts painted a picture of laughter, inside jokes, and carefree moments. But behind the curated images, a very different reality was taking shape. Skylar had begun confiding in close friends outside their trio about the growing tension. She'd mentioned fights petty at first, but increasingly bitter. Shelia's controlling nature and Rachel's tendency to follow her lead had created a dynamic where Skylar felt alienated. She wasn't just losing her best friends, she felt like she was being pushed out. Then there were the whispers, rumors about secrets Skylar had uncovered, things Shelia and Rachel didn't want anyone else to know. Skylar's candid nature and sharp intuition may have made her a threat, someone who could disrupt the facade they worked so hard to maintain. The tension grew with each passing day, bubbling beneath the surface of their interactions. Arguments turned venomous, and Skylar began to notice the way Rachel and Shelia would exchange glances when they thought she wasn't looking. It was as though something unspeakable lingered in the air, a storm waiting to break. And on that fateful night, it did. While Skylar went about her life, Oblivious to the depth of her friend's betrayal, Shelia, Eddy, and Rachel Shoaf were devising a horrifying scheme. This wasn't an impulsive decision made in the heat of an argument, it was coldly premeditated. Weeks before that fateful night, the pair whispered their plans in hushed tones, their friendship bonded by a shared, twisted purpose. The reasons were almost absurd in their triviality: petty arguments, jealousy, and a warped sense of control. For Shelia, it was about dominance. For Rachel, perhaps it was fear of losing Shelia's approval. They discussed the details with chilling detachment. What would they use? Where would they go? How would they cover it up? The plan began to take shape. They agreed to lure Skylar to a remote location, far from anyone who might hear her cries for help. And they agreed on knives, weapons that required proximity and intention. For Shelia and Rachel, this was more than a plan. It was a performance, one they rehearsed in their minds over and over. By the time the night arrived, they were ready to carry it out without hesitation or remorse. The night of July 6th felt like any other summer evening. The three girls laughed as they drove through the winding back roads of West Virginia. Skylar sat in the back seat, her guard completely down, as Shelia and Rachel played their roles, perfectly chatty, cheerful, and warm. They told Skylar they were headed to a spot they'd been to before, a secluded area where they could relax, talk, and enjoy each other's company. The plan seemed innocent, even comforting. Skylar had no reason to suspect the true intent behind this late-night outing. The car pulled off onto an unmarked path, surrounded by dense trees and shadows that stretched endlessly into the night. As they stepped out, the girls joked and giggled, masking their unease. Skylar followed them willingly, her trust in them unshaken. Then came the moment of betrayal. Shelia and Rachel exchanged a quick glance, a silent signal. They counted to 3, and just like that, the knives they had hidden gleamed under the moonlight. They turned on Skylar with sudden, brutal precision. Skylar fought back, her screams piercing the stillness of the forest. She begged them to stop, pleaded for her life, but their resolve was unshakable. Each act of violence was deliberate, calculated, as though they were finishing a task rather than committing an atrocity. By the time it was over, Skylar lay still, the life stolen from her by the very people she had trusted most. The woods were silent again, the laughter and promises replaced by an oppressive, chilling void. The night air was thick with silence, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves underfoot. Skylar stood with her back to her friends, unaware of the danger creeping closer. Behind her, Shelia, Eddy, and Rachel Shoaf exchanged a final glance, their hearts pounding with anticipation. 3, 2, 1. The words fell like a countdown to destruction. In a flash, the girls lunged at Skylar, their knives gleaming in the pale moonlight. The attack was swift and ferocious, fueled by weeks of pent-up malice. But Skylar wasn't about to give up without a fight. She screamed, the sound echoing through the forest, a desperate cry that would never reach another soul. With every ounce of strength she had, Skylar fought back. She clawed and kicked, her survival instincts overpowering her fear. Her small frame became a whirlwind of defiance, determined to escape the betrayal unfolding before her. But the odds were stacked against her. Shelia and Rachel's resolve never faltered. Their blades struck again and again, leaving Skylar's cries to fade into the suffocating stillness of the forest. When the struggle ended, Skylar lay motionless, her body a testament to her bravery. The woods fell silent once more, as if holding its breath in mourning. Shelia and Rachel stood over Skylar's lifeless body, their breaths ragged and their clothes stained with blood. The reality of what they had done was stark, but they didn't falter. They had planned for this. They knew what needed to be done, or so they thought. The girls searched the area for a suitable place to bury their friend, but the rocky terrain proved unforgiving. The ground was too hard, the tools they brought inadequate for the task. Panic began to set in as they realized their meticulously planned crime was unraveling. With no other options, they resorted to a desperate solution. They dragged Skylar's body to a more secluded spot where the trees stood taller and the shadows were deeper. There, they covered her with branches, leaves, and debris, creating what they believed was an untraceable grave. To them, the job was done. They wiped their hands clean, discarded the evidence they could, and left the forest behind, confident that no one would ever find Skylar. But the woods have a way of revealing their secrets. The shallow grave would not remain hidden forever. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the Neese family's apartment, signaling the start of another summer day. But when Mary and Dave Neese went to wake their daughter, Skylar, her bed was empty. At first, they assumed she'd gone out early. Maybe she had a shift at her part-time job or was spending time with friends. But as the morning stretched on and her phone remained unanswered, worry began to seep in. Mary called Skylar's closest friends. One after another, they said the same thing: they hadn't seen or heard from her. Shelia Eddy, ever the convincing actress, reassured Mary that Skylar would turn up. But as the hours ticked by, that reassurance rang hollow. By evening, the Neeses' worry turned into full-blown panic. They called the police to report their daughter missing. While authorities took the report seriously, they had little to go on. Skylar was 16 after all. Teens had a tendency to wander off, they reasoned. Without evidence of foul play, it was difficult to justify a large-scale search. Still, Mary and Dave refused to rest. They printed missing person flyers and combed through their neighborhood, calling Skylar's name into the darkening evening. The unease in their hearts grew heavier with every passing hour. Shelia, Eddy, and Rachel Shoaf slipped seamlessly into their roles as grieving best friends. Their performances were flawless, blending crocodile tears with carefully worded expressions of concern. They called Mary and Dave regularly, offering comfort and support while slyly fishing for information about the investigation. On social media, the girls painted a picture of heartbreak. They posted old photos of Skylar, adding captions like "Missing my best friend so much" and "Come home, Skylar." To the outside world, their pain seemed genuine. To Skylar's parents, their concern appeared heartfelt. Behind closed doors, though, it was a different story. Shelia's calm demeanor betrayed no hint of guilt, while Rachel's composure began to crack under the weight of what they had done. Shelia's influence over Rachel ensured their dark secret remained hidden, at least for the time being. But the walls of their facade were not impenetrable. Skylar's parents found it odd that Shelia, who had been so close to their daughter, wasn't more active in searching for her. Mary would later recall a hollow quality in Shelia's consolations, a detachment that didn't sit right. Unbeknownst to the Neeses, they were embracing the very people responsible for their daughter's disappearance. The truth lingered in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to come to light. Heartbreak clung to Mary and Dave Neese like a second skin, but they refused to let despair paralyze them. From the moment their daughter vanished, they made it their mission to bring her home. The quiet apartment where Skylar once laughed and studied now became command central for a relentless search effort. Flyers with Skylar's bright smile and unmistakable red hair were posted on streetlights, shop windows, and community boards across Star City and beyond. Mary and Dave spoke to local news outlets, pleading with anyone who might have seen their daughter to come forward. Despite their determination, the investigation was painfully slow. The police treated Skylar's case as a typical runaway situation in the early days, a narrative that frustrated her parents. Mary and Dave knew their daughter. She wouldn't just leave without a word, especially not without her phone charger or money. Weeks turned into months, and the Neeses' hope began to teeter between desperation and resignation. Despite countless sleepless nights and dead-end leads, they refused to let Skylar's story fade into obscurity. Every interview, every poster, every call to the authorities was a cry for justice that they would never stop shouting. As the Neeses pushed forward, the cracks in Shelia and Rachel's carefully constructed facade began to show. For Shelia, the act was second nature. Her calm, composed demeanor barely wavered, and she continued to play the grieving best friend. But Rachel was a different story. The weight of guilt bore down on her like an avalanche, crushing her spirit and unraveling her composure. Her once sunny disposition grew darker, her behavior increasingly erratic. Friends and family noticed her withdrawing, plagued by bouts of anxiety and emotional outbursts. Shelia's control over Rachel, once strong, began to weaken. Rachel started avoiding Shelia, creating distance as the burden of their secret became unbearable. Shelia's reassurances, once a lifeline, now felt suffocating to Rachel. Those closest to Rachel noticed the changes. She became jittery, prone to tears, and less interested in maintaining the facade of normalcy. Her parents, concerned about her deteriorating mental state, grew increasingly worried, but had no idea of the storm raging inside her. While Shelia seemed untouchable, Rachel's unraveling was a ticking time bomb. The guilt that gnawed at her soul would soon push her past her breaking point, setting the stage for the truth to come crashing down. By December 2012, Rachel Shoaf could no longer carry the unbearable weight of her guilt. The cracks in her composure had grown into gaping chasms, and the secret she had been keeping felt like it was suffocating her. Her erratic behavior had reached a breaking point, and her parents, deeply concerned, demanded answers. During a particularly volatile episode, Rachel finally broke down. She sobbed uncontrollably, the words tumbling out in fragments as her parents tried to make sense of her confession. "We killed her. We killed Skylar." Stunned and horrified, Rachel's parents contacted the authorities. The truth Rachel revealed was beyond anything they could have imagined. She recounted how she and Shelia had planned the murder, lured Skylar into the woods, and carried out their horrific act. The confession shattered the illusion of innocence Rachel had clung to for so long. When Rachel sat down with the police, her story spilled out in grim detail. She described the events of that fateful night, from the countdown to the attack to their failed attempt at burying Skylar. The investigators were left in shock, realizing they had been dealing not with a runaway case, but with a premeditated, cold-blooded murder. After her confession, Rachel agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation. As part of her cooperation, she led authorities to the remote wooded area where she and Shelia had left Skylar's body. It was a cold winter day when investigators followed Rachel to the site, their boots crunching against the frozen ground. Months of exposure to the elements had uncovered parts of the shallow grave. The branches and leaves that Shelia and Rachel had hastily piled over Skylar's body had long since withered, leaving the remains partially visible. The discovery was both heartbreaking and critical to the case. Forensic experts worked carefully to recover Skylar's remains, piecing together the final moments of her life. The evidence matched Rachel's account, confirming the horrifying details of her confession. Skylar's parents were informed of the discovery, their worst fears realized. Mary and Dave Neese were devastated, but they remained steadfast in their determination to see justice served. Skylar had been found, and now the focus shifted to ensuring her killers were held accountable. Rachel Shoaf's confession left no doubt about Shelia Eddy's role in Skylar Neese's murder. Armed with Rachel's testimony and corroborating evidence from the crime scene, investigators moved swiftly to bring Shelia to justice. On a cold January day in 2013, police arrived at Shelia's home to place her under arrest. The girl who had once portrayed herself as a grieving friend now stood accused of orchestrating and carrying out a brutal murder. To the shock of law enforcement, Shelia remained eerily calm during her arrest. Her expression was blank, her demeanor cold and detached. She didn't cry, plead, or protest. Instead, she faced the accusations with an unsettling stoicism, as though the gravity of her actions didn't faze her. As she was led away in handcuffs, Shelia's silence spoke volumes. Her lack of remorse chilled even the most seasoned investigators, who couldn't fathom how a teenager could commit such a heinous act without any apparent regret. Shelia's arrest marked the beginning of the legal battle to hold her accountable for her crimes. It also marked the end of the illusion she had worked so hard to maintain. The girl who had once posted heartfelt tributes to Skylar on social media was now exposed as a cold-blooded killer. The news of Skylar Neese's murder and the betrayal by her two best friends sent shockwaves through the small, close-knit community of Star City, West Virginia. For months, residents had rallied around Mary and Dave Neese, sharing their heartbreak and praying for Skylar's safe return. Now they were grappling with the horrific truth. The betrayal cut deeper than anyone could have imagined. Shelia and Rachel had been pillars of Skylar's social circle, girls who had shared her laughter, her secrets, and her dreams. That these same friends had meticulously planned and executed her murder was a reality too horrifying to comprehend. Neighbors, teachers, and classmates were left questioning everything they thought they knew about the two girls. How could such a heinous crime come from children raised in their own community? What had driven them to commit such a monstrous act? The mourning for Skylar took on a new weight. Her life had been stolen not by strangers, but by those she had trusted most. Candlelight vigils turned into tearful gatherings as the community tried to reconcile their grief with their shock. The betrayal wasn't just personal to Skylar's family, it felt like a collective wound, one that would take years to heal. As the legal process unfolded, the stark differences between Rachel Shoaf and Shelia Eddy became evident. Rachel, racked with guilt and eager to cooperate, pled guilty to second-degree murder in May 2013. Her confession and willingness to work with authorities played a pivotal role in unraveling the case and led to a lighter sentence. Rachel's remorse was evident, but it could never undo the damage she had caused. Shelia Eddy, on the other hand, remained defiant. Her stoic demeanor persisted as she faced the full weight of the law. In January 2014, she pled guilty to first-degree murder, avoiding a trial that could have further exposed the horrifying details of her actions. Despite her plea, Shelia showed little, if any, remorse. Rachel was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Her cooperation spared her a harsher penalty, but her involvement in Skylar's murder would haunt her for the rest of her life. Shelia received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 15 years. For many, this punishment seemed lenient given the cold, premeditated nature of her crime. The courtroom was filled with a heavy silence as the sentences were handed down, a small measure of justice for the Neese family and the community. In the wake of their daughter's tragic death, Mary and Dave Neese were determined to ensure that Skylar's legacy would not be defined solely by the betrayal that took her life. They channeled their grief into advocacy, becoming outspoken champions for missing children and working tirelessly to prevent other families from enduring the same pain. Their efforts culminated in the passage of Skylar's Law in West Virginia. This legislation expanded the state's Amber Alert system, removing the requirement for law enforcement to prove a child was abducted before issuing an alert. The change ensured that missing children could be located more quickly, potentially saving lives. Skylar's Law became a beacon of hope amidst the darkness of her story, a testament to her parents' unyielding love and resilience. Mary and Dave also became active in speaking engagements and community programs, using their platform to raise awareness about the dangers of peer pressure, toxic friendships, and the importance of trust. Skylar's memory lives on not only in the hearts of her loved ones, but also in the lives that have been touched by the changes her story inspired. Her life, though tragically cut short, became a catalyst for meaningful change, ensuring that her light continues to shine. The murder of Skylar Neese exposed a sinister side to what seemed like a typical teenage friendship. On the surface, the trio had been inseparable, sharing secrets, laughing at inside jokes, and navigating the highs and lows of adolescence together. But underneath the facade of camaraderie, resentment festered, jealousy simmered, and petty arguments grew into something far darker. How could two teenagers, barely old enough to drive, plot and carry out such a horrific act against their best friend? The answer lies in the complexities of adolescent relationships. For Shelia, Eddy, control and dominance seemed to fuel her actions. Rachel Shoaf, desperate to maintain Shelia's approval, became a willing accomplice. Their toxic dynamics spiraled out of control, leading to a betrayal so profound it left an entire community reeling. The case served as a stark reminder of the hidden dangers that can lurk within seemingly ordinary relationships. It prompted parents, educators, and mental health professionals to take a closer look at the emotional struggles faced by teenagers and the pressures that can push them to unthinkable extremes. Skylar's story highlighted the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences when that trust is shattered. It left an unsettling question in its wake: how well can we truly know the people closest to us? Even after the trials and sentences, the case of Skylar Neese leaves behind a host of unanswered questions. Why did Shelia and Rachel feel that murder was the only way to end their friendship? What was it about Skylar that made her a target of such calculated cruelty? Could someone have stopped them? Were there warning signs that others missed, moments when intervention might have changed the course of events? Rachel's eventual confession suggested deep guilt, but what about Shelia, whose cold demeanor betrayed little remorse? The psychological motivations behind their actions remain a mystery. Were they driven by jealousy alone, or was there a deeper, more troubling pathology at play? The case continues to baffle experts and haunt those who knew Skylar, leaving a trail of speculation and unanswered questions. Skylar's tragic death serves as a haunting reminder of the fragility of trust and the darkness that can lie hidden in even the closest of bonds. Her story challenges us to reflect not only on the nature of friendship, but also on our own roles in recognizing and addressing the warning signs of toxic relationships. In the end, Skylar's memory endures as a call to vigilance, compassion, and the hope that such a tragedy can be prevented in the future.